The next part is part 5, parenting information. And so this is on different parenting circumstances and situations with adopted children. The first article is on breastfeeding your adopted baby. Of course, a lot of families want their children to be breastfed just because, it provides extra nutrients for the child. But a lot of families are like, okay, we're adopting, we can't breastfeed our child. It is possible to breastfeed your adopted child through hormonal supplements that you can take. You have to figure out what is best for you and your baby. It's important to keep in mind that a lot of times if you are doing this through the hormonal supplements, then a lot of times your baby you won't be able to produce enough a lot of times for your baby to just go off of that. A lot of times you will still have to supplement with formula. So it's good to keep that in mind. But if this is something that would interest you to breastfeed your baby, you can talk to your doctor about that further. I know a lot of adoptive parents also want to get breast milk from like a donor or somebody like that. We never encourage families to use a donor that they don't know, because I know they have like breast milk banks that you can go to get breast milk. And I know there are regulations that they have to follow, but the CDC actually says like don't use those. Even though they create regulations for those donors banks to use, the CDC says recommends not to use those, just because you don't technically know what you are giving to your child, if they're going to have a reaction, what might occur. So, the next article is on adoption and the stages of development. As I mentioned earlier, adoption is going to be something that affects your child at every stage of their life differently. So this article is good because it goes through the different stages of your life and it talks about specific adoption issues that might arise in each phase of your child's life. So of course, in the first year, your primary thing is going to be creating that bond with your child and developing trust with your child. That continues into age 2. Where you're working towards that trust with your child. This is a lot of times where your child begins to struggle with some separation anxiety, and you might see some of that. And all that stuff is very natural, even of biological children. Just sometimes it can be a little more compounded because you have the adoption issues as well. So again, you're viewing everything through the lens of adoption. Ages 2 to 6, this is where your child is developing their identity. It's a lot of times where your child will first start to recognize that they might be physically different from other children, if they're of a different race. It's also where your child begins to learn about and really kind of understand the topic of adoption, especially in the older years, like 3, 4, 5, 6. They're beginning to understand what adoption is. You might begin talking with them more about biological family at this point and what that looks like. They're going to begin having feelings and expressing emotions and throwing tantrums and that kind of thing, which again is very typical of all children, but it's just compounded because of the adoption lens we're viewing everything through. This talks also about, and I already talked about this a little bit, but ages 3 to 6 is when your child any child starts to wonder where they come from. If it's a biological child, a lot of times they start to wonder about pregnancy, and if one of their friends has a pregnant mom, they'll ask about that, and where do babies come from, and that sort of thing, just very elementarily trying to understand. And so again, if you have a child that's adopted, you add a whole nother element to that story of where did I come from, because you're explaining their adoption story as well. So, talks in here about exposing your child to the term adoption and to what adoption is early. Families always ask me, at what age do I tell my child they're adopted? And I always say the same thing. If your child can have a concrete memory of the moment they were adopted, you waited too long. Mm-hmm. You want them from the moment they are, before they can really understand it. Mm-hmm. You want them to know the word adoption and begin to explain it to them. And the great thing is that there's plenty of children's books on adoption, and so it's not entirely upon you to explain this totally foreign concept to them. You can utilize children's books, a lot of TV shows. I know Doc McStuffins last year did a couple episodes where they adopt a baby. So it is a much broader fact of life now, and it's addressed more. So, children who are adopted when they're older or who are of a different race, the article addresses that. It talks about how they're going to deal with things that are specific to what they went through, and a lot of times, children that are older have memories. They have, they can physically remember before their adoption, and there's that time of before adoption and after adoption, and so you're going to be helping them through that. This book, in one of the earlier sections, it talks about making like a life book with your child, or if you but if you collected things during their adoption process, you can scrapbook, or you can create a book of their life with them. Talks about the elementary school years, further steps in separation and identity formation. The biggest thing as your child gets older, elementary, junior high, high school, the biggest issue a lot of times is them figuring out who they are, because there's this huge aspect of who they are that they don't have answers to, especially if it was a closed adoption or international where they have no connection to their biological parents. This is one of the reasons that we are big proponents of open adoption, is because open adoption gives your child answers to all these questions that they're going to have when they're in junior high and high school. Psychological identification is important as well. It's important also to keep in mind if you have information on your child's biological parents and any mental health issues that they had, because a lot of times during teen years is when those start to present themselves. So keeping that in mind as well. If you know that your child's biological parents had bipolar disorder or something like that, it's important to keep that in mind. I'll let you read through the rest of that article in your own time. The next article is on how to raise a healthy baby, and this is one that has a lot of information, so I'm not going to go through it very in depth, but this is not as adoption focused and is more just parenting focused. I realized in our adoption that I prepared so much for all the adoption stuff, and I did not prepare so much for the actual parenting part, the real life parenting part. That I didn't know a whole lot once I brought my baby home. So it's important to prepare for the non-adoption related issues as well. So, but I'll let you. It's a great article, just kind of letting you know month by month in the child's first year what they're going through. In the next little article here is called In the Child's Voice. And this is really good article because it kind of lets you know from the child's point of view what they're going through. So it's, it divides it up. You have birth to 8 months, 8 to 18 months. What's the next one? I think it's 18 months to 3 years. So it talks about what they're feeling, who they are, what they're learning about people, objects, and how things work. Learning to move and do things. They're learning to communicate and relate. So it gives you all of those different age ranges and what your child's going through at each different age range. But again, because a lot of families are like, is this child related or is this adoption related? And so this article is good because it gives you kind of what the standard norm is so that you can know if your child is deviating from the standard norm. Always keeping it in mind that not every child's the same. My child who was adopted at 9 months, right now my biological child is 9 months old. And there are things my adopted child, who should have been developmentally delayed, could do at 9 months that my biological child can't do. So every child is different in meeting their developmental milestones and what they're going through. The next article is on how you can influence your child's brain potential. And this is especially good for adopted children because a lot of times, that time before they come to you, their brain may not have been developed as much to its full potential as it should have been. And again, even for domestic families, there was 9 months in utero where the most brain development happens, where the child may have been mistreated. Maybe it was a domestic violence situation. Maybe the mother drank alcohol. Maybe the mother did drugs. There is abuse and neglect that occurs even in utero. So expanding your child's brain potential is important. So I'll let you go through that in your own time. And that is the end of that section.